This is Recruiting Roundtable, where we talk to HR and talent acquisition leaders about thoughtful topics in the world of recruiting. For today's discussion, we're going to be talking about diversity in the workplace. Diversity has always been an important aspect of a healthy workplace culture, but has become even more important in 2023 and in recent years. We have an incredible panel here to provide their insights on this topic. Joining us are RyanMae McAvoy, Director of People Operations at Blackthorn, and Ben Normann, a talent acquisition leader who has over 20 years experience in recruitment and people operations in a number of high growth companies. Ben, RyanMae, thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Of course, of course. So as tradition, we like to start with some intros. So I'm going to ask each of you to briefly discuss your role or, kind of your background and a brief intro, of the companies you've worked for or the company you're currently at. So let's start with RyanMae.
Yeah, thanks. I have over 10 years of HR operations experience. I have consulted, I've worked in veterinary, I've worked in ski areas. I have kind of touched a lot of industries, which I think is helpful when you have an ops background. Currently, I'm the director of people operations for Blackthorn.io. We are a Salesforce App Exchange partner. We have a suite of apps that work with your Salesforce ecosystem. We are located in 13 countries, and my day-to-day is overseeing all the people functions, no matter where you're located, kind of hire to retire. I have a great talent team that I work with, and just kind of touch every piece of payroll, benefits, client support, or customer support. I consider our employees my customers, things like that, making sure everything is working in the background so our team's able to succeed.
Great. Thank you, RyanMae. And Ben?
Yeah, thank you. And RyanMae, it's nice to meet you.
Yes.
About 20 years of experience working in talent acquisition. I started off working on the agency side, which gives me hopefully some empathy to a very difficult job on the agency side in recruiting. Worked in finance in New York for that period of time, and then pivoted to tech and moved in-house. Have worked primarily in enterprise B2B SaaS. Most recently was at Flex, which is a little bit different as a supply chain and logistics technology company. Fascinating. If you've never kind of dove into that space, check it out because it's pretty incredible. I've led global teams of TA professionals across the world, which has been super exciting. Just really passionate about DE&I. I always have been, have made that a priority in my roles. Just really excited about the conversation today.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate your time. And lastly, my name is Sean Huynh. I'm a manager director at Rocket. We are a recruitment agency. So thank you, Ben, for understanding some of the hardships that we go through. We have an in-house AI-powered sourcing workflow tool, which enables our recruiters to spend less time reviewing thousands of profiles manually and more time on what really matters, which is building relationships with our clients and candidates, which in turn helps our clients hire 2 times faster. Okay, so you both have been part of high growth companies recently. And so, Ben, your last company grew from 170 employees to 500 employees in 2 years. RyanMae at Blackthorn, you've seen growth of around, I think, 30 employees when you started in 2021 to like 130 now. So been phenomenal growth stories that you've been a part of recently. At what stage in the company's growth do you typically see DEI more prevalent in conversations? Is it from the day you walked in, or do you see that conversation changing as the company grows and evolves? Let's maybe start with RyanMae.
I think it kind of depends on, sadly, it depends on what's trendy. Sometimes DEI is the hot topic, sometimes pay transparency. And that's when you get a lot of attention from outside of people and talent because it's more in front and center for them. For me, moving to Blackthorn, there was the big discussion of like, hey, I'd love to have a more diverse talent pool. This is important to me. I'm still learning kind of how to approach it best, what's the best practices, where to get the resources, etc. So I think it's very mindful as the professionals that Ben and I are, we determine how much importance that is to us and we keep the conversation going because our circles or our crowd, we talk about this pretty regularly, whereas your CEOs, your COOs, your sales, they have such different perspectives and it may not be front and center for them, even though it is important. And I truly believe all people are very big on diversity, equity, inclusion. It's just, how do you get there? How do you work together? How do you keep it front and center? How do you keep it current? And so on.
Mm-hmm. That's a definitely a great point. Ben, what are your thoughts on this?
I think that's very well said. It depends on the company. It depends on the leadership. I think everybody appreciates the value. I mean, it's proven the value of outperformance of diverse workforce or workplace. So it really kind of depends on the scenario you encounter. You know, at every company that I've been fortunate to work with, it's been a priority, right? And we've made it a priority because we've had the support of leadership at that company. And to RyanMae's point, it's on us as people, team leaders in whatever function, to champion that and to kind of help guide them in the right place in terms of execution.
So Ben, on that topic, you mentioned productivity, right? We know that having a diverse workforce is fantastic for company culture, right? But talk a little bit more about productivity. I'm interested in your take on that.
Just in terms of how diverse workforce impacts productivity.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it comes down to a variety of things. I mean, and you can go back to, I guess there's like McKinsey studies and all the, this has been studied for a long time, and just in terms of corporate culture and performance. But I mean, I've seen that firsthand. At Flex, we were able to impact this in a significant way, right, in terms of increasing representation in the workforce, not just in terms of kind of ethno-racial lines, but also from just experiences, right? I know it's sometimes not separated, but when you move away from homogeny and you kind of have that diverse people bringing different ideas or seeing what's been successful in different environments, different cultures, is additive, right? No matter how you slice it. So I've seen it in my own teams. I've seen that the teams that we built, the companies I've worked for, and it's enjoyable. It's fun to work with people with different perspectives, different backgrounds. I mean, that's makes we spend so much time at work, having that exposure, kind of that range is, for me, it's personally satisfying.
Yeah, totally. We spend a lot of time at work, that's for sure.
Yeah.
RyanMae, what are your thoughts on the productivity piece?
Ben hit the nail on the head there. There's so many people that learn and kind of come up a different way. I always use the example of parents. I am a childless person. Parents are superheroes. They're going to find the quickest, most efficient way to do it because they've got 20 other things to do. And sometimes they're personal customers of their children needing stuff, or there's events and commitments. So really having people from every walk of life, globally, gender, childless, not childless, beliefs and everything is really important to productivity, because sometimes the same 5 people are going to be like, well, we have to go left to make this work. And it's going to take that one person that's not from that same group going, we could go up vertical and figure out something. It's going to save us time, save us cash flow, or I've actually seen this before in my experience. So here's how we solve that problem.
I would add one thing in that just made me think of that, or you made me think of that. I think when you're working in a diverse environment forces you to stretch, right? I think you're forced to encounter people whose life situations are different than your own, right? And in order to work in an environment like that successfully, you have to either have or build an increased empathy toward people's varying, backgrounds and situations. And that's, I think, healthy for any company culture, right? The more empathy we have, I think the better off we are as people, rather than kind of not being stretched in that capacity if you work in a more homogenous environment.
That's such a valuable point. I think empathy is it's so critical to having a strong workplace culture, right? So that people are supporting each other. And I love that you brought that up. Thank you for bringing that up. So, no, go ahead.
I know that it's focusing on the human element. That's when you're more empathetic, you think of your people as humans. And that's something we emphasize regularly is we're not just Blackthorn employees. I don't care where you are, who you are, you're not just a Blackthorn employee. A lot of us are members of a community, spouses, partners, aunts, uncles. There's so many other bricks to our foundation. And if you don't have empathy to all of that, you're not going to succeed pretty much at anything, let alone career-wise or productivity-wise.
I'm looking for like a little cheer emoji or clapping emoji, but I don't think there is one.
It's interesting. So many people, I've heard this a lot recently, particularly because there's been a lot of layoffs in the last 18 months. Is a lot of people, they really, they associate their almost like their worth to their job. And I think, in a lot of the changes, there's so many people changing jobs now. I think you have to be really grounded in who you are as a person. And I think having empathy for other people and their backgrounds allows you to be more grounded in your own life. And so I really appreciate the points that have been brought up here. It's really, I mean, we're 10 minutes into this and this is already going really well. All right. So how do you ensure that DEI is a priority without introducing bias? Maybe we'll start with Ben.
Yeah, that's the real trick, right? One of them. Again, and it's on everybody to own creating an inclusive culture, right? Which just kind of goes back to the empathy piece. But ultimately, if your leadership team needs to be champions and stewards of this. If not, then you're fighting an uphill battle. Not that really anybody's like against doing this, but in terms of making it a priority, right? The bias part is really interesting, right? Because how do you affect we'll call it like statistical change in a workforce without introducing bias in the other direction, right? Because if you're looking to increase representation, you have to disproportionately hire people coming from underrepresented backgrounds, which means you're making a decision, a conscious effort to do that, which in my opinion is the right thing to do, right? Again, with the purpose of the greater good of creating a more diverse workforce, right? Helping to build, strong company culture driven by empathy, right? All these things. It has to be intentional. And I think the key there is I always focus on people, processes, and technology, right? So that's sort of the trifecta for me in terms of foundation. Hiring the right people who are, again, empathetic, who are professional, who are, eager to learn, who can work autonomously, who you can trust, right? The building processes, and you can have a whole hour-long conversation around what you can do in terms of process building to reduce bias throughout the talent assessment process and throughout everything people related. And then the technology, which I know is obviously part of where Rocky comes in, is there are technologies out there, especially from a talent sourcing perspective, that you can use to mitigate bias. You can never eliminate it, but mitigate bias in a talent sourcing or interview process, which you have to kind of be doing all of those things or have all those things operating in an optimal way in order to mitigate. So it kind of depends on what part you want to talk about.
I want to put a pin on that people, process, technology. We're going to dive deep into that. But before we get there, I want to ask RyanMae her thoughts on trying to eliminate bias.
I think it's the $1 million question, and I don't know if any of us have the full answer. I think for us, if we can say, okay, we want to diversify on gender, well, if I'm only looking at applications from females, I could be missing out on great talent. And my approach has always been, I want to hire the right person for the job. I don't want to say, oh, you got it because you're the right box we're checking. That's not welcoming to them. It's not comfortable to them. It's going to create doubt. It's going to create resentment. And then you're also kind of doing the thing you're trying not to do, which is you're creating bias against a whole other group of people. So I don't think it's a perfect process. And I think part of it is having the conversation. I always use the name example. We have a global workforce with 1 million different names. And I was at a powerful talk a couple years ago, and the woman straight up was like, if you can learn Game of Thrones characters' names, you can learn people from other regions' names. And I always use myself. If like someone's like Ryan, I was like, hey, actually it's RyanMae. It's kind of weird, 2 words, I get it. And they keep coming back to it. I'll stop the conversation and be like, hey, I have employees in several different countries with different names and different pronunciations. And if you can't be respectful of that, I don't think I want to move forward. And that's kind of the same thing. It's a process we use. We look at it with candidates. Our talent team's really good at asking questions. How are you with time zones? How are you with global things like that? Because it can be hard. I received messages early this morning. It was time zone. It was needed. It would almost be a disservice to our diversity for me to be like, hey guys, I am not online, even though it's the end of your workday, flex to me. And I think something that's really important in creating a lack of bias is having the hard conversations. I can't think of the book title right now, but once you realize your privilege, and we all have a privilege, no matter what you are, you have to be uncomfortable in talking about it. You have to acknowledge like, hey, I have blonde hair and blue eyes. It might be a little easier for me than someone else. And that sucks, but how do I help? How do I work in the things? And I think you have to be uncomfortable in these conversations, which is why a lot of DEI initiatives fall short, because one, everybody's busy, and two, not everybody's willing to be like, let's have that raw, uncomfortable, where all of us are kind of like, ugh, this is hard conversation.
Mhm.
And that's where it goes back to what Ben said. You have to have leadership. It's got to be a top-down initiative. Your leaders have to be willing to talk about it. Your leaders also have to be willing to let you as a professional step in and say, hey, we can't only interview one gender, one race, one sexual orientation, one religion, because then we're biasing against a whole other group of people. You have to be
Right.
able to have that candor and openness with your leadership as well.
Yeah, and I think that's where there's a huge opportunity for people in the people function to lead the conversation, like really take that leadership role and shine, help guide these leaders. So I think overwhelmingly, in my experience at least, been fortunate, have really had kind of best interests of the not just the company but also the integrity of the company at heart, right? And but may not know the right thing to do or limitations of what you can do. So I think there's a huge opportunity there.
Yeah, I mean, DEI is just not checking a box, right? It's an organization, it's a culture thing, and I think, unfortunately, some companies they view it as check the box that we're doing this, but do they live it and breathe every day? Maybe some are for sure. Some maybe not. I want to go back to the people, process, and technology conversation. Ben, what are some, because you mentioned this is something you're really passionate about. Can you walk us through how the things you do with the people that you place into certain roles and the
Sure.
processes that you implement and the technology that enables them?
Yeah. Well, I think of it again, having built a career in talent acquisition and working in people functions. Uh, for me, hiring recruiters, right? If you think of it like the talent acquisition folks, or if you're working with third party agency, don't have internal recruiters, doing your due diligence and really spending the time digging in to know the agencies you're working with, right? Because they're representing you as business and they're the touch point with the talent pool out there. But hiring and working with people that you trust, people that are going to represent the company well, that are going to speak to candidates and engage with, whether you hire them or not, right? Engage with the marketplace in a meaningful way, right? Is of the utmost importance. And it's always the first thing in my mind, right? If you hire people
Mhm.
that you can trust, you can give them autonomy, you can give them responsibility. They're hopefully people that are eager to learn and develop. So that is the cornerstone of the whole thing. And that's true of not just in talent acquisition, but all functions within an organization, in my opinion.
Mhm.
If you have that foundation, you have people who are all kind of rowing the boat to the same objective, right? Bringing their own unique styles and experiences, whatever, but are working as a team. Then you can really focus on, okay, what are the processes that we can put into place to help mitigate bias, right? To help, whether that's interview methodologies, uh, different, resume review. I mean, there's again a whole list of things that you can do from a process standpoint, or really any of these, to mitigate bias and increase representation by ultimately increasing outreach to underrepresented communities and putting them through a process that you've done your best. Again, there's never a perfect process or a perfect thing to mitigate bias throughout the process. And that's not just on the recruiting team, that's an interview process that extends right into the employee's experience in the workforce of the organization. Again, that ties to, it's sort of from first to last touch in their entire experience in the organization. And then from a technology standpoint, what are the tools along the way that you can use, right? So they're from a candidate sourcing and outreach perspective, again, from a interview data capture perspective, like how are people recording or not recording, documenting and sharing information in conversations about candidates, right?
Mhm.
There's so many opportunities along each stage of the process to educate and to leverage both processes and technology to mitigate bias, which is really your only significant opportunity to increase opportunities for people from underrepresented backgrounds going to successfully navigate through this process. I don't know. Hopefully that answers your
Yeah,
question.
that was a great overview. RyanMae, your thoughts on people, process, and technology?
I think Ben hit it on the head. I think the first step is the relationships. I
Mhm.
don't know Ben's thoughts on this, but I've been a people ops person, payroll, compliance, culture building, all that. I know the value in a good talent person. And I think you have people that are like, I love doing the talent piece and then I want to toss them to ops. And that's how but you have to have that balance, because talking
Mhm.
to 1,000 candidates, that sounds exhausting to me. And you have to have such a good skill set and you have to be such a great people person at a higher volume than my role. And so for the example of Blackthorn, Matt Roy is the head of our talent. He and we are a dream team. I trust him with everything. I trust his judgment, because he comes to me and says, hey, this doesn't sit right. What are your thoughts? Hey,
Mhm.
I don't know, compliance wise, are we good on this? And we have that conversation. Same thing. We did some internal referrals. I wrote the policy on how to do the referral process. I haven't looked at it. I had to go to him and be like, hey, what's the best way to do this so I'm not mucking up your systems? And then on the flip side, with the technology is amazing. Maybe I'm a little bit of a conspiracy theorist or doubter. I've read so much saying that a lot of these things are built with unintentional bias.
Mhm.
And I think questioning that, like, if you're coming to me with a system, show me how it's not unintentionally biased. If
Mhm.
you're like, hey, we're a great team and you're all male, I'm going to make sure you're not DQing females off of something that you may not be aware of. I want to
Mhm.
know that.
Mhm.
And so having that questioning, and I think just really the passion that I think Ben and I both share, questioning the norms, pushing the envelope. You don't have to be aggressive about it. You don't have to stand on top of your desk and stamp your foot and say, this is how it's going to be, because then it becomes a box check. Nobody wants to
Mhm.
hear you. So the box is checked, we're good. Whereas if you bring it into meaningful conversations, when you guys first approached me, I was like, I am not the expert on this. I am not the right person to talk about this. I'm passionate about it. But I think that's part of why you guys continue to engage with me, is because I was like, I am in no way a DEI expert. I can send you referrals to a million people that have spent tons of years building this. But on a day to day, it is something near and dear to my heart. And it's something every single year I strive to learn more on and I strive to be better at.
Well, that's why we have you here, and we appreciate that you're open to joining, getting out of your comfort zone a bit, right? And
Very much.
uh, well, this is great. This is what we're all trying to do. I want to touch on that technology piece a little bit more. Maybe I'll go back to Ben, because in our pre-show call, you talked a little bit about some technology that you've used. What are some technology, whether SaaS products or otherwise, that you've used to help move DEI initiatives forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, I've not seen everything under the sun, so there are certainly other technologies out there. But
Mhm.
from a TA perspective, again, just to restate, if you build a process, right, where you've helped to mitigate bias, right, throughout that interview process, and it touches on so many things, then the opportunity to affect change is really being intentional about your outreach to different communities. And if you're intentional about your outreach, not exclusively, right? You ultimately, as RyanMae said, you need to hire the best candidate.
Mhm.
But if you are focused in your outreach, your active sourcing to underrepresented groups, and you say, look, like, we want to engage with these communities, there are tools that can help you do that, right? So we've used HireEZ was one. I think it was formerly called HireTool. We've used that with
Mhm.
great success. I've looked at Seekout. Seekout's another great product, and there are many others out there. I mean, if you think about recruiting, talent acquisition, you're effectively, if you're doing it well, if you're doing it right, you're running a marketing campaign, right? A series of
Mhm.
marketing campaigns, and pushing with the brand, right?
Mhm.
And you have to have a brand to fall back on, right? Which is a whole other conversation, or a brand to lead with, I should say. Um, but those technologies are ultimately used to engage with the population and present a value proposition. Say, hey, look, like, this is an amazing company. You should come work with us. We're people like you, at least, that have a common culture, right? Not necessarily people from like you, but people who have a shared beliefs that hopefully resonates with you and that makes you interested in wanting to work with them. Um, so I think that's where I've seen the most success. There's things that you can do once they're into a process, or once they're an employee, right? From different technologies to manage feedback or interview, the interview experience, or an ATS system, so on and so forth. But again, being intentional in the outreach and having the tools to be able to assist you in running those campaigns, and um, connecting with individuals who are coming from backgrounds that you're looking to engage with is key. Because if you're not having those conversations, you don't have the opportunity to do anything else.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can definitely see the application on the sourcing side. Um, So we've talked about sourcing, RyanMae. Do you have any applications of where you're using technology at Blackthorn to help drive some of these DEI initiatives forward?
We utilize our HRIS a lot. We input a lot of information. We keep a pulse on that. We're very big on salaries tied to locations, of that sort of thing. As far as like tracking actual DEI initiatives, I had made a statement 6 months a year ago. I was like, "Ah, I just feel like we're kind of lacking." And our COO, who is ultimately one of the best mentors and leaders I've ever worked for, was like, "We're in 13 countries. We have females in leadership. We keep," and I was literally taken aback because I was like, I didn't even look at it. I was so busy. And this is where I worry with DEI is it a box? Is it data? Is it numbers on a line? We are a pretty diverse culture. We have people all
Yeah.
over the globe. They're experiencing different holidays, different time zones. We have every gender, we have every sexual preference, but it wasn't in a nice little data set for me to say, like, good job, guys, we're doing awesome. And I couldn't see my nose despite my face. So I think as far as technology, having a full HRIS system, keeping track of your ATS, those were important.
Mhm.
I again, maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist or whatever you want to call it. I don't know if technology is the end all be all for this because we're hearing now it's more DEIB with the belonging. I don't know how technology is going to translate to belonging. That's a human
Mhm.
element, and you need people like three of us having these conversations, taking it to our leaders, taking it to the streets, taking it to candidates, and really trying to engage in those ways. And to me, that's a bigger push on saying, hey, we're doing a good job. Because again, I've been in Blackthorn for since pretty small size. I've been involved with all of these hires, and I made the very ignorant statement like, we could probably do better. And there are ways we could do better. But we do
Mhm.
talk about it. We very much focus on our genders being paid fairly, our regions being paid fairly. How does that look? Because it's not always easy to get the best candidates. And I know in our pre-show, one of the examples I used, my husband is an engineer and
Yeah.
he graduated almost 10 years ago. His engineering class had 2 females in it. We're in the Silicon Valley. Engineering and tech is pretty predominant, has been for a really long time. Okay, so automatically 98% of my candidate pool from that class is male. Great.
Mhm.
That's tough. Those are tough numbers to fight. Okay, so we're going globally. Is it still pretty male predominant? Yes, but at least I'm getting some different cultures. I'm getting some different aspects. And then you build on each piece that you can solve because it's not going to
Mhm.
be a one size fits all.
I totally hear that. I mean, the pipeline is so important. So I prior to joining Rocket, I ran a recruitment agency for about 4 years, and we're up here in Toronto, and hiring, like, I would always say to a lot of clients that would ask for certain things if they had a diversity initiative, I would say, look, we typically look at candidates' LinkedIn profile from the summary down because we want to focus on their experience and their skills, and that's kind of how we oriented to find the best candidates. And if they happen to hit your diversity kind of metrics, great. But what we found was naturally you did kind of get a diverse talent pool, right? Because there are a lot of people getting into whether it's software engineering, product management, or product design. Though I totally hear what you're saying, Ryan. In terms of software engineering, it is still very much male predominant kind of career, and hopefully, as more females and other genders get involved in software engineering, that will change over time. And I think we are seeing that. So it's an interesting comment though about your husband's class.
Well, and I think having the conversations. I have nieces and nephews. I'm like, go into software, ladies. Let's do this. You don't know what gender
Hmm.
you identify as? Go into software. Like, there's a need. Technology is evolving every day. We see it. And even a really great example in kind of my profession, Lattice just named a female CEO. It was shared in our Slack channels because we're Salesforce adjacent. She was at Salesforce. And I jumped right in and was like, first of all, yes, because most of the HR profession is female, but most of the C levels in HR tech are male.
Mm.
That math doesn't math. So I think this is awesome. And everybody was like, oh, I didn't even think of that. And I was like, well, yeah, you're not in HR tech. Like that's not going to affect you. You saw the Salesforce element, but I was going to put it front and center because go girl. I love that.
That's great. So kind of this is will be the last question as we kind of get to the end of this. So let's look forward in terms of emerging trends. We're at the close of 2023, moving into 2024. What are some emerging trends you're either seeing talked about or you've heard about as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion moving forward? Ben.
Yeah, no worries. I assumed as much. Well, I mean, you can't really have a conversation this day and age without talking about ChatGPT or generative AI, right? And how is that technology being adapted or adopted for any function, really all functions, right? Talent, people is no different, right? So it's really interesting to see how different products are, leveraging that technology. And certainly, we kind of saw the beginnings of that last year or the last couple of years, right? In terms of more automation, more tools available to leverage. So I think that's a huge piece, right? And how does that impact to RyanMae, whether conspiracy theory or not, right? Like, what are the sort of secret machinations behind that, right? Like, how does it work? What is it doing? How is that influencing our engagement with talent, with people, right? So I think the fundamentals of the importance of DEI and I would put belonging in there as well, because it ties back to empathy and equity and everything. But I think that's really the new frontier, right? I think in so many ways, and it certainly applies to DEI as well. Right? How is that technology being leveraged? How is it being what is the impact? And it's so early on in the development of and implementation of all this stuff, we don't really know yet. But having worked with it a little bit, I think it can be an incredibly powerful tool. It's not a silver bullet, right? There's no silver. I think to RyanMae's point, there's no silver bullet to solve this stuff. It's an incredibly complex, difficult conversation to have and to execute well. But there are things kind of along the way that we can leverage or use from a technology standpoint that hopefully make us better at what we do and create more opportunities. So I think that's, at least in my opinion, it's the kind of at the forefront.
And RyanMae, what do you see the trends being in the new year?
I definitely agree with everything Ben said. I think we're hearing ChatGPT, AI is everywhere. A flip side of that is technology being more widely available. I think we're going to see less emphasis on degrees and educational standards. I think to me, I'm a champion of that. A personal passion is second chance hiring. I think our justice system has a lot of work to do. And I think as soon as your background check flags, if it's something from 10, 20, 30 years ago, and we're like, oh, you're DQ'd, we're cheating ourselves out of a great talent pool in that aspect. So I think, okay, so you don't have a degree, you would be the best coder in the world. You could be the best talent person because you have that personality, you have that talk. Why am I going to just automatically DQ? And I think it's going to open us up into a huge talent pool of actually amazing individuals that in years of past, again, because the box didn't get checked, they got passed on. And it's also going to open up a lot of education's not something everybody automatically has access to, especially higher education. There's a lot of programs out there. We are really making an effort looking at boot camp programs. If you're doing certificates, it doesn't have to be traditional. Maybe you learned to code on the internet and now you could use a little help, but you've got every other thing we're looking for culture-wise. That could be a great hire for us. We actually have a gentleman who runs like a quick boot camp for Salesforce certification. I'm considering signing up, not because I ever plan on being a full Salesforce developer, but I think it'd be a great skill set to add. It'd be a great way for me to kind of see what our people go through. And what are we looking for skill-wise? Is this something that does require a 4.8 postgraduate degree, or is it something you can be open to with a non-traditional? I think it's going to be, maybe it's not just the educational piece. The non-traditional resume, I think, is really going to become the future. And that ties to ChatGPT. A lot of people are saying, we don't even look at resumes anymore.
Yeah.
We look at your LinkedIn, we look at your network, we look at you in the interview process. It's going to open up diversity in a huge way, and I'm really excited for it.
That's a great point. That's a whole other podcast. We're not going to look at your resume anymore. The death of the resume. So, Lucy, write that down. We're gonna maybe create a new episode about that. RyanMae, Ben, thank you so much for your insights. This is an amazing conversation. We're gonna be sharing this. I think a lot of people will get a lot of value out of it. So thank you both for your time. And hopefully we'll continue to stay in touch, and hopefully you can connect, and we'll move on forward. So until next time, thank you so much everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.